Now, there is growing momentum to establish a United Nations-backed court to prosecute Russian crimes committed in Ukraine. 2 weeks ago, the EU's top official, Ursula von der Leyen, threw her weight behind the idea of a Nuremberg-style trial, that distinct from the ICC investigations that are already ongoing. So just how likely is it that the most senior Russian officials could one day end up in the dock to answer questions related to the war in Ukraine? And what lessons might we learn from previous prosecutions of world leaders? Well, joining me now is a man who I hope may well be able to shed some light on those rather difficult questions. It is Reed Brody, a veteran war crimes prosecutor who's even been dubbed the Dictator Hunter for his work in bringing leaders like Chile's Augusto Pinochet and Chad's Hissène Habré to justice. Thanks very much indeed, sir, for coming in. It's a pleasure to see you. So your new book is just out. It's called To Catch a Dictator, The Pursuit and Trial of Hissène Habré. He was the leader in Chad. Tell us a little bit about the process of bringing him to justice, because I understand it took a quarter of a century.
It did. So Hissène Habré was the dictator, the U.S.-backed and French-backed dictator of Chad, who was overthrown and fled to Senegal. And when, in 1998, when a Chilean dictator, Augusto Pinochet, was arrested in London on a warrant from a Spanish judge, I went to work on that case. And when the British House of Lords ruled that he could be prosecuted anywhere in the world, despite his status as a former head of state, everybody started dreaming, who's next? And I was approached by Chadian activists who said, Hissène Habré is now in Senegal. Can you work with his victims? And so, as you say, it took 25 years. It took me 13 years to get from the first complaint until we got him in a court. And then he was sentenced and convicted by a court established by Senegal together with the African Union.
And when you began that process, did you ever think, in 20, 25 years' time, we will get this man in the dock? Because when we look at, other war crimes being committed around the world, I think for many people it feels like quite a stretch to imagine you can get that leader to justice.
Well, it took mobilization and continuing advocacy. I mean, Suleiman Gengeng, the hero of the story, a modest functionary who was thrown into jail by Habré, and his people were dying around him. He took an oath before God that if he ever got out, he would fight for justice. And he did that. And together with Jacqueline Moudena, the victim's Chadian lawyer who was almost killed in a grenade attack, they never gave up. And the case went to Belgium, it went to the International Court of Justice, it went to the African Union. But that's the thing, victims never give up. And these crimes also have no statute of limitations. And so finally, after mobilizing and campaigning around the world, we were able to get Senegal and the African Union to support a trial for somebody who had been brought to power by the U.S., who had been brought to power by France, who was supported by other African dictators. But ultimately, we were through this mobilization, we were able to overcome that resistance.
Indeed, and that is remarkable. The wheels of justice, though, did turn rather slowly. And I wonder, when you look at that experience and you try to bring that to what we're talking about today, the war in Ukraine, this idea of a special war crimes tribunal to prosecute even the likes of Vladimir Putin, I mean, does your experience tell you something like that is plausible, or is it for the birds?
Well, first of all, there's never been a massive justice mobilization as we see today in Ukraine in real time. I mean, there already are. The Ukrainian justice system has thousands of cases. The International Criminal Court has opened its largest investigation ever into war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Ukraine. 14 European countries have opened cases. Every day, people are sending experts to Ukraine to look into war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now, the proposal that you talked about that is being endorsed by van der Leyen and by the European Union is a different court. It's a special court to prosecute the supreme international crime, which is aggression. Nuremberg Tribunal convicted German leaders for what they called the crime that paves the way for all the other crimes, aggression. The thing is that after Nuremberg, France, England, the United States, Soviet Union, they didn't want aggression to be an international crime. They didn't want a judge to tell them that their invasions were illegal. So we all support the idea of a tribunal for aggression, but there's a large dose of hypocrisy here for countries that did not want their own military interventions to be subject to review by a judge, to propose the same thing for Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to ask you about that, because neither Russia nor Ukraine, as I understand it, are parties to the International Criminal Court, but I mean, nor is the United States. And there will be those out there that say, well, it almost feels like if there is a Western country behind a kind of international prosecution like this, it's plausible. But if it comes to, the United States invading Iraq, Bashar al-Assad's crimes in Syria, actually, there's no chance of this happening. What do you think?
I think that's a very fair criticism. I mean, last week I was in The Hague at the International Criminal Court. The prosecutor has jurisdiction over Ukraine. He has jurisdiction over Palestine. We don't see any action on Palestine. The budget that the prosecutor has requested for his investigations in Ukraine is 5 times the budget that he has requested for Palestine. There are crimes going on in Ethiopia. There are crimes going on in Yemen. There are crimes going on in many places. I mean, the massive response in Ukraine is heartwarming. It's exactly the kind of response we want to see everywhere. People in real time documenting crimes, getting ready to bring cases. It's just that should be applied in other situations as well.
But it's not even for the moment guaranteed it will be applied in the case of the Russian biggest leaders like Vladimir Putin. I wonder, is there a possibility that should such a court be established, he and other top leaders could claim immunity? Well,
before the ICC or before a special international tribunal or before the ICC, the Russian leader would not have immunity. Now, right now, the ICC is looking at war crimes and crimes against humanity. We've seen already 6 trials in Ukraine. We can expect that they're going to work their way up, either to show that people on the top gave orders or that people allowed their subordinates to commit crimes. That's command responsibility. Vladimir Putin has never, since the beginning of the war, prosecuted a Russian official for war crimes, told Russian officials to stop. So he could be found liable under the principle of command responsibility. The question is, that is a meticulous and time-consuming process. One of the advantages of a special tribunal for aggression is that it's a leadership crime. Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is the person who decided on that intervention. Therefore, one goes straight to the top for Vladimir Putin. But in either the case of aggression or war crimes and crimes against humanity, you still have to get your hands on the person. And unless there's a radical change of regime in Moscow, unless the Kremlin is willing to hand over Vladimir Putin, the international community does not have a police force to go in and haul him before a court. But these are also crimes that have no statute of limitations, so that those indictments, whether it's for aggression or war crimes, could potentially hang over Vladimir Putin for the rest of his life.
Well, that's quite an extraordinary prospect, but I'm just thinking slightly shorter term with the war in Ukraine very much still going on. Is there a risk that if Vladimir Putin or other Russian leaders believe that there are these kind of war crimes investigations going on directly against them, that they will be less willing to sue for peace to end the war in Ukraine because they certainly don't want that process to get underway?
Well, I don't see any flexibility on the part of Vladimir Putin. But these investigations are not going to stop. They have started for war crimes and crimes against humanity. They're not going to stop. But even if the war ends, the international community would still have to get their hands on him. We saw an indictment against the president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir.
Who certainly never went to the International Criminal Court.
Well, he's not even in power anymore, and Sudan still will not hand him over to the International Criminal Court. So there's, in addition to a legal problem, there's a huge practical problem of getting your hands on somebody in order to bring them before a court.
And just finally then, when you look back to Chad and the successful eventual prosecution of Hissène Habré, was there always that belief from the victims, from the families, that in the end, justice would come? And is that perhaps a lesson for these world leaders that we're talking about today, that maybe it will take 20 years, it will take 30 years, it will take 50 years, but they believe that goal is possible?
You know, we are seeing around the world. I mean, just a few weeks ago, the last of the Khmer Rouge was convicted, sentence was upheld. I mean, Guatemalan dictator, 30 years afterwards. Charles Taylor, 10 years after. I mean, justice does not have a time limit. Victims never give up. And, you know, the justice process moves forward. So I think there's always a hope as you move forward for victims that they will see justice, that they will see compensation, that they will see, you know, the tables be turned on people who are now seem to be getting away with their crimes.
Reed Brody, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. And your book, To Catch a Dictator, is out now. Thanks very much indeed.
Quite welcome.